This is the first video in a 4-part series on breastfeeding and heading back to work. So if that's the case for you, or you're pregnant and that's going to be the case for you, stick around. Like I said, there's 4 parts in this series. The first one, this video, is about what your employer needs to know and what you need to get from your employer. The first thing that you want to do is inform your employer that you're going to be pumping when you return to work. It's important to remember that you're not asking for permission to feed your baby. You're informing them of what your needs are, what your plan is, and how you'll still get your work done. I recommend sending an email ahead of your return with a written, fairly detailed plan of what you'll need from them and what questions you have, with the vibe of that email being a little bit assumptive that, of course, this is going to work out and of course they're going to support you. Don't attempt to over-explain yourself or put a timeline on how many months you'll be pumping for. Most of us don't know that information when we start out, so let's not put too fine a point on it. Simply state what your plan is, including how many times a day you plan to pump, where you plan to pump, and how you plan to get your work done, regardless of the fact that you're pumping. If there's anything you need from your employer, say so. This is the time in that original email to say what you need from them. And if you have any questions for them, it's important to ask those questions. An example of that might be that you describe your plan and then you say, I'll need a private room with a locking door in order to pump. Where do you think is the best place for that? You could even suggest a couple of options. I was thinking that spare office on the 4th floor or the conference room near the entrance, whatever it is. It just needs to be private and locking. Additionally, if you're an hourly employer, it's probably a great idea to specify that you understand that these breaks to pump are unpaid. Then you want to close by thanking them. People are more likely to do what you want them to do if you speak as if it's already done. You can also use the phrase, does that sound reasonable to you? Most people will say yes because no one wants to seem unreasonable. So let's talk about making your plan. In your plan, start by including one more pumping session per workday than you think you're going to need. And I'll tell you why. Your breast pump, as cool as it is never going to be as efficient at removing milk from the body as a baby is. So that means that you may need to pump longer than a baby would nurse, or you may need to pump more times in a day than a baby would nurse. This isn't the case for everybody, but just in case it's the case for you, we should plan for it ahead of time. Let's talk next about breast storage capacity. This is something that can vary greatly from person to person. It's the amount of milk that your breasts have available in them at any given time. Breast storage capacity is a tricky thing because there's no correlation between the size of the breast that's visible on the outside and the storage capacity on the inside. So we want to have the opportunity to pump as many times in our workday as we think we'll need. And then if we can come down by a pumping session later down the line because we're getting so much milk and it's fabulous, that's great. But it's much harder to tell your company, your employer, that you're going to pump this many times and then have to add one later. We want to ask for the higher number and then reduce if needed. We'll talk about how to get the most milk when you pump, as well as several other pumping hacks in video 3. If your employer has more than 50 employees and meets the rest of the federal criteria, they're legally required to provide you with a clean, locking room, private room in which to pump. They're also required to offer you however many unpaid breaks it takes for you to get the milk that you need. If you happen to work for an employer that's not required to follow those federal guidelines, you might still be protected at the state level, or you might not. Most of us in the US have 0 rights for pumping at work. But our employers don't necessarily know that, and we shouldn't approach it from a position of, I'm not going to be supported. We always want to go in with the best in mind and work from the assumption that everyone wants to support us. Stay professional and always make it as easy as you can for them to accommodate you. So an example of that might be creating the entire plan yourself and just looking for their approval on it. Whereas if you come to your employer and you say, well, I want to pump when I come back to work, what does that look like? You're putting the onus on them to create a plan for you. No employer wants to take the time to do that. Also, no employer wants to be wrong or assumptive, or it's just, breastfeeding is kind of sticky territory for them. So if we can create the plan ahead of time, everything we think is reasonable and fair and meets our needs, and we show them the plan and say, does this sound reasonable to you? That makes it much easier for our employer to accommodate us. Okay, here's a topic that might be hard to hear. When you take those breaks to pump, I encourage you to take actual breaks to pump. Let me tell you what I mean. A lot of moms go back to work and they think, oh, I'm just gonna get some work done while I have a hands-free pump doing the work for me. I know that that sounds so convenient, and unfortunately for a lot of us, it's too good to be true. I know it's tempting to pump while you work so that you don't have to lengthen your day with those pumping breaks. But pumping, just like nursing, is a hormonal response. So for a lot of us, we're not used to having a milk letdown to a hunk of plastic, which is what a pump is. It's not a baby. There's no sights, sounds, smells, feelings of our baby that are telling our brain to have that hormonal output that causes a milk letdown, and then we get the milk that we need. So when we're trying to let down to a plastic pump, we really need to focus, especially in the early days. You may want to look at pictures or videos of your baby, or my very favorite hack is bringing a baby's onesie with you in your little pumping bag and smelling it when you're trying to have that milk let down. The moms I work with consistently tell me that if they're trying to get work done and they're in stressed work mode, or they're watching Netflix, or they're listening to a true crime podcast, all of those things keep our brain in a place that is not conducive to having a milk letdown. So I recommend actually taking a break, being in that calm, relaxed place, taking some deep breaths, maybe turning the lights down. It all makes a difference, and it all adds up to greater milk output. Let's talk about boundaries. Holding boundaries as a working parent is essential. You are no longer the pre-parent version of yourself. So when you go back to work, your professional parenting boundary is gonna have to be really strong. Be professional, but also be unapologetic. If you were somebody who previously overgave at work, this is gonna be a little bit of an adjustment for you. Or honestly, it might not be hard at all. Giving birth really crystallizes our values and our priorities. And so some moms find when they go back to work that it's pretty easy to just do what they need to do for work and prioritize their family. I hope you'll stick around for part 2, which is everything that your daycare provider needs to know in order to help you be successful going back to work as a breastfeeding mom. See you then. All right, okay. Everything that your child